I knew that we had to do something differently. And I also knew that we couldn't gatekeep it financially because it just shouldn't be that difficult to get access to something that should be free. Our social capital, our relationships in the world should come by virtue of our character as people, of our integrity, of the kindness and generosity and intellect that we bring into the space that we're in, not by virtue of how much we can afford to pay for a membership due or whether or not our employer will pay for that for us.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Everybody Has a Podcast podcast. It's just a name that I thought was very clever. I think my guest Raechel will agree. But today we are talking with Raechel Canipe. She is based out of Tampa, the Tampa area, and has started this organization. I think it's been about a year and a half, Raechel, right? First of all, welcome to the show. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here. I love the name.
And when you started Women in Tech and Entrepreneurship, yeah, we're just gonna dive right into it. Why it's odd because we've known each other since then, and one thing that I think you get across is that while there are some other organizations, you really wanted this nonprofit. Or pardon me, tell me a little bit about the structure of it and what makes it different. I think it's very unique in its
So with Women in Tech and Entrepreneurship, we've taken really a unique approach. The mission is to provide resources to these ambitious women, whether they're already in it as founders or as techies, or if they're aspiring to be in those spaces one day. And we want to connect them with the community, the mentorship, the high quality vetted educational resources from peers who look like them for free to help them get where they're going in life without those financial obstacles. And the free membership model and free events in and of itself is pretty unique in our space. Most networking groups, most skill building kind of groups, there are pretty high barriers to entry in terms of price tags. And we believe that that is one of the leading obstacles to creating more diversity in tech and entrepreneurship. We're automatically gatekeeping this resource that should be free, which is social capital, right? The way that I got invited to this podcast, right, is through social capital and networking and relationships. And those kinds of opportunities aren't readily available if you're not able to pay those membership fees. So that's the first thing I think that makes us really unique in terms of how we fund and operate the organization. The second thing is that we are not a nonprofit. We have a lot of experience in the nonprofit space. I've sat on many boards. I've worked on the staff of nonprofits. And I think nonprofits are important and they do wonderful things in the community. But I have also watched them struggle with unnecessary obstacles and what I call golden handcuffs, whether that is a grant that will only fund a program that your community doesn't want or doesn't need, or that creates more resource vacuums in your organization than it solves for, whether
Right.
that is a donor that wants to put their name on something flashy that doesn't meet the needs, or any other litany of things that prevent those groups from being as quick to address needs and as innovative as they can be. And so we're a social enterprise.
I've been in the tech industry as a reporter for going on or more than a decade, probably 15 years. And one thing that I've always has always been consistent is this lack of funding for women entrepreneurs, entrepreneurs of color as well. Um, you know, can you talk to me a little bit about just the challenges? Because I think, it's strange because, like I said, 15 years down the road, I haven't seen a huge change. Like there's some level of movement toward, a little more evenly, but you're talking like instead of just 50%, it's 20%, right? There's a very small incremental movement. how do can you talk to me a little bit about just challenges of there is of raising money as a woman entrepreneur?
It's actually much worse than that, right?
Yeah.
3% or
Mm.
less of all VC funding goes to women-led teams. It is getting better for teams that have male and female co-founders together, but what the data reveals is that women-led teams are actually 30 to 40% more profitable than male-led teams. They are typically yielding longer life cycles as a company and finding more sustainable long term success, better at things like employee retention and any number of factors that make them attractive for acquisition, which is exactly what investors are hoping for, right?
Right.
They want these companies to have really successful exits. And if you look at what a PE firm or another company is going to look at when they're considering M&A, they're going to look at how profitable you are. How long have you been able to survive? How responsible are you in your stewardship financially? And what kind of culture, team, and talent do you have access to, among other things? So, while funding continues to remain so low, is kind of a mystery. There are several possible reasons why. One thing is that there are very few women investors. Very
Right.
few venture capital teams have any women investors on their team. Women investors are more likely to invest in those products and those companies. The other thing is that when we're investing, we want to understand the product and what its
Mhm.
value is. And if female founders are innately solving problems or just more likely to be solving problems for women, like femtech, right? Or health tech for women, it can be a little bit harder for male investors sometimes to understand the value of what they're looking at. So
Right.
there's
Right.
a phenomenal medical device biotech company in South Florida that acquired this patented technology that is a painless IUD.
Mm.
And it was invented for horses because we felt bad for wild horses that they were suffering with these inhumane sterilization practices, which is important, right? Animal
Right.
welfare is important. But we got to horses before we got to women. And this particular entrepreneur recognized the value of that as a woman who has dealt with an IUD and acquired the tech.
Mm.
But getting funding for that, it's hard, right? And then, the other aspect, anecdotally, just the stories that I hear from my members are things like young women pitching investors and having the investors stop them at the end and say, I was so lost in your beautiful eyes, I couldn't focus on your pitch. Can you do it again? You know how hard it is to
Wow.
deliver an incredible 3 to 5 minute pitch that succinctly wraps up the value of your idea and your team and your business and the successes that you've had and the amount of pressure that that is to have someone dismiss you and turn it into an opportunity to make a pass at you. So there are a lot of things that need to change when it comes to how we fund women's businesses. And the last thing that I'll say is that if you're a first time founder or a female founder, you may not have a network that can support your friends and family round. Most of the time, investors are looking to see that you've been able to raise upwards of $500,000 through friends and family who believe in you. I know personally that would never be an option for me, right?
Right.
The network that I had before I got into the professional sphere would not have been able to support that. My family is not able to support that kind of investment. That's not attainable for a lot of families nowadays, with, a majority of all Americans not having a basic amount of money in retirement or emergency
Right.
savings. So that's another obstacle that prevents some of these female founders from being taken seriously in the first place.
What is your organization, Women in Tech and Entrepreneurship? What kind of why did you start that? Why did you start it first of all, and also, um, what kind of like support do you think that provides for these women entrepreneurs? And obviously, it's not just women; it's also supporters of women entrepreneurs are welcome to go as well, right? Talk a little bit about just that side of it, of just the support system you guys have created.
Yeah, absolutely. I have been incredibly lucky in my career. I think, like a lot of people who are graduating college, even right now, you come out of that 4-year degree, or if you got your master's 6-year degree, and you're supposed to have it all figured out and know exactly what it is that you want to do. But the reality is that there's a lot
Keyword
more
is supposed
uncertainty
to.
than supposed to,
Right.
right? There's a lot of trial and error that has to happen, a lot of exploration and experimentation, and in my family there was no one who really had gone into business, and I hadn't planned to go into business. So I found myself with this psychology degree, and I didn't know what to do. I realized that I'd been really idealistic and I wasn't going to be able to support my family the way that I wanted to with that degree. I was making more money waiting tables. And so I was lucky through a graduate student that I had in my 4-year program. I was forced to create a LinkedIn profile because this individual had the wisdom and foresight to know that networking was important no matter what, and that some of us wouldn't go on to be research professors in psychology, right? So, because of that nudge, I did have some kind of networking happening that opened the door to my first job opportunity. And all along the way, I was really lucky to stumble into these mentoring relationships and sponsorship relationships that helped me grow in my career, that pointed me towards resources that I had to go and get for myself, right? I had to find the money for these resources. I had to commit the time and invest the effort to capitalize on these resources, but I wouldn't have known that a thing like a leadership development program existed, or that I could go sit on the board of a nonprofit if it
Right.
wasn't for these early mentors and sponsors that I had. The networking efforts continued to grow from there, but it was always a financial struggle to do that, right? And as I advanced in my career, despite having these great mentors, I also encountered a lot of just blatant misogyny, everything from being sexually assaulted at work to being told that by my boss who had hired me to travel 36 branches that young single women shouldn't travel for work, and everything in between, right? And
And
I
how old
thought
were
at
you,
first,
how old were you then?
I was in my mid 20s.
Okay.
Was in my mid 20s. It wasn't that long ago. It was in like 2017, right?
Right. Right.
And it was benevolent, right? This guy has daughters, was worried about me being out there on the road, right? But um benevolent misogyny is still a barrier to me doing my job the way that I
Right.
need to do it. And so in my own career, I've seen the transformative power of networking and community and mentorship, but I've also really had to struggle to get access to that.
Mhm.
There typically was some kind of paywall involved or membership fee at a time in my career when I was picking and choosing what bills I could pay and working two jobs. And this is not a unique experience, right? When you're first starting out, some amount of financial struggling is expected, and dare I say, can even build a little bit of character. But at the same time, I was also facing the friction and the barriers, despite having really good sponsors and mentors and male influences in my life. I was dealing with the friction of everything from blatant to benevolent misogyny in the workplace. And for a long time, I thought that it was just me. I was picking the wrong workplaces. I was provoking this reaction somehow. I was just wrong place, wrong time all the time. And I heard everything from, oh, you should use your first commission check to get your boobs done because you will get
Huh.
more sales, to young single women shouldn't travel for work, from both times from different bosses, right? And I I again went on a long time thinking that this was kind of a unique experience that I was
Right.
somehow bringing on myself. But then through the communities that I started building and the networks that I started building and the women I started meeting, I realized that actually a lot of women were having these experiences. And I know we talk about the impact of Me Too and
Right.
how much conversation was being had and how many things were being dragged out into the light. But as many women as were speaking out, there were a lot more who weren't, either because we don't want to hurt our teams. We don't want to hurt the one really wonderful sponsor that we had at that place. We don't want to hurt the brand just because there's one, misogynist that happens to work there. And we keep quiet about the experience, right? And realizing that this was happening to more women than just me in the 20 teens, right?
Right.
Not in ancient history, but in current present day, I knew that we had to do something differently. And I also knew that we couldn't gatekeep it financially because
Right.
it just shouldn't be that difficult to get access to something that should be free.
Yeah.
Our social capital, our relationships in the world should come by virtue of our character as people, of our integrity, of the kindness and generosity and intellect that we bring into the space that we're in, not by virtue of how much we can afford to pay for our membership due or whether or not our employer will pay for that for us.
And that jumps
And
right into the like kind of like a question, because I think one of the things that I've admired about what you're doing is your very outwardly saying we're keeping it free, no matter whatever happens with this. I mean, obviously, sponsors, funders, whoever wants to help out, of course, but for the members, for the people who come to these events, we're keeping it free. Um, I love that because again, it removes one of the barriers of entry, um, and it is an important thing to have. And when you meet some of these women and hear some of their stories, I mean, it's got to empower you a little bit too, right? To say, this is what you're building. I'm not asking you to pat yourself on the back or anything like that, but I am saying that like you have to be a little proud of what it's become, because now you have chapters all over the place. You have other women stepping up in each region of Florida, leading their own kind of local chapters and beyond Florida. I know there's that I had connected with a woman from California who was involved with your group as well. Talk a little bit about just kind of seeing this thing grow so quick, frankly, rather quickly. I think that you're finding there's a lot of need for this.
I am. And it's a virtuous cycle, really. So by virtue of having such a wonderful network of women leaders already who recognize the need for this, we were able to move much more quickly.
Hmm.
We're a volunteer powered effort. And initially, I thought, I had always had the intention of growing chapters outside of my backyard because there are women everywhere who
Right.
need and want this. But I thought I would have to get out on the road and kind of campaign to get these chapters launched. And instead, what happened was women started driving from 4 hours away for a 2 hour event over and over and over again, from
Right.
Tallahassee, Jacksonville, Orlando, South Florida, to come to Tampa for an event. And so I was able to create these win win scenarios with these women by saying, if you're coming from this far away, it must mean that there's something that's not being provided in your own community. Would it make sense for us to
Right.
have you lead the torch or carry the torch in your community and bring these resources there too? And so we've been able to grow very quickly in that model, but we've also just seen a crushing demand for more chapters than we can support at one time because there really isn't much else like this. There are lots of groups for women realtors, women business owners, women in tech international, right?
Right.
Great groups out there. But there are very few that bring the two communities, both the entrepreneurs and the tech community, together, and there are no groups that do this for free. And what's more, we empower our members rather than patronizing and bringing in outside experts. We source our own community for the experts we're putting on stage because women have always been leading in these spaces. They just
Hmm.
haven't been given the airtime to talk about what they're doing and to share that knowledge with others. And so we're putting our own members on stage. We have our members voting for and choosing the kind of content that they want to see and the kinds of events that they want to see on a monthly basis. And so it's a very different model from what most networking groups do.
Well, I'll tell you, I think that's important, is to have this platform, because entrepreneurship is not easy, just in and of itself. But then we have to deal with these other challenges. It's got to make it a lot more difficult. But I'm gonna put you on the spot though, and I swore I wouldn't do this, but
Okay.
I'm going to anyway. I said, what do you like to do, and you said reading, right? That's people may not believe, people who see this may not believe this, but I do prepare for these interviews. Um, but the one thing you mentioned that you said you can't do too often that you like to do is scuba diving. I have never gone scuba
Yeah.
diving. What is it about scuba diving that kind of like makes you love it so much?
Well, for one thing, my mom was a diver and
Oh,
a
okay.
very adventurous. And so she was on motorcycles, scuba diving. She spent
That,
some time in Costa Rica. She's much cooler than me.
see, this is
But
what I
I
need. You
thought,
gotta get. I should interview her instead.
you do need to interview her. She's much cooler than me. And so I thought that diving might be a way for us to spend some time doing these adventures together.
Yeah,
And she's actually kind of since hung up her fins. It's getting harder and harder for her to do.
yeah, right.
However, I found through my own experiences with diving a really wonderful way to disconnect.
Mm.
You are not answering emails when you're 90 feet under the ocean, right?
Right.
No one can get a hold of you. No one can call you. No one can text you.
That
And it's
sounds like heaven.
incredibly serene.
That sounds
It
like
is
heaven. It
serene.
sounds
It's
perfect.
surreal. And it requires an intense amount of concentration. You have to monitor how you breathe so that you're the right amount of buoyancy so that you're floating and gliding through the water instead of smashing into the seafloor and bouncing around off the coral, destroying our beautiful ecosystem, right?
Right,
So there is this kind of flow state that you get when you're diving, and you just get to be up close and personal with things like sharks
right,
and
right, right.
barracudas and lobsters who are way bigger looking in the ocean than they are on the
On
plates.
your plate, right?
And it's just a really incredible way to see something new and different, get in touch with nature, and disconnect.
Well, see, when I feel like when lobsters see humans, they want revenge because they know where all
They're kind of
yeah,
scary.
yeah, they know what you
They're
get
kind
when
of
we
scary.
they know what we do to them. So
They do. They do. It's not right.
well, it sounds like serene, and I love that. And I think you know, does that ability to disconnect and kind of when you're underwater, does that flow into your life? I mean, do you try to take moments to disconnect? I know you mentioned earlier that you're super busy from 9 to 9, but are you ever able to disconnect? What kind of things do you like to do when you do disconnect? If that's not answering emails.
Yeah, kayaking is another great one. I love the feeling of pulling through the water, the rowing aspect of kayaking, but
Such a
again, it's a
metaphor.
beautiful way.
It's all a metaphor, isn't it?
I
Yeah,
guess I don't
pulling
think I,
through, pulling through. You know.
you may be a little deeper than I am. But it's this beautiful way to connect with
Yeah,
nature again too, and we're lucky here in Florida to have these beautiful mangroves and ecosystems that we can explore in that way. And so there's just nothing better than being in a kayak and you're just enjoying being unplugged and getting some sun and feeling some salt on your skin, and you have a dolphin pop up behind you. I mean, the first time that ever happened to me, I almost fell out of my kayak because I just heard the whoosh and I didn't know what it was. And I could spend 45 minutes just watching a dolphin hang out
right,
in these mangroves. So that's another thing I really enjoy. I love hiking, but it's hard to do here in Florida. We're
right,
kind of a pancake state, and it's really
right.
hard to get the time to get away to go hiking. But I'm hoping that I'll be able to find some balance and do more of that. But disconnecting is hard. The other night I laid in bed for 2 hours trying to sleep, and all I
Yeah.
could think about were things that I was suddenly able to solve only at 2 o'clock in the morning. And I couldn't sleep. So I got up and I worked. But usually, part of the way that I help myself to disconnect is reading
Yeah.
fiction.
Yeah.
So I've read a lot of business books, enough business books. I do not read business books anymore unless they're written by someone who I'm really, really interested in.
Right.
I will listen to the Blinkist, like the cliff notes of it, but I don't need to hear the same ideas phrased slightly different for the
That's
45th time, right?
that's business literature right now.
It,
Basically,
it really
everyone's
is.
saying the
It's hard
same
to have
exact
new
thing.
ideas at this point in the game.
Right. Right.
It's
Tell
hard
me.
to have new ideas this far into the culture.
Finally, let me ask you one last question. Kind of what is it? You have all these projects. You have the 9 to 9 rat race that you're in. What pushes you? What motivates you to kind of keep doing this? Because you don't have to. But why do you continue to kind of go through and say this is something that's really important that exists and I need to be a part of it?
Yeah, I'm not gonna lie to you. I have days just like anyone else where I
Right.
question why I'm doing this. If I stopped doing women in tech and entrepreneurship, I would increase my income by almost 100% overnight. I would have a new car paid cash at the end of the year and a maxed out retirement account. And I would probably be able to acquire a small business or invest in something else that could be passive income for me, maybe a rental property, and I would be working, 60 hours a week instead of 80 hours a week.
Right.
But I was just having a conversation earlier today about the detrimental effect of grind culture, and that is not what I'm here to condone. I
Right.
think it
Right.
is unhealthy, right? What I'm doing right now is unhealthy, and I'm optimistic that I will find better, more sustainable ways to do this as we take on sponsors and funding and can hire
Hmm.
some people to help with things that need to happen. But that said, when you find that thing that you're called to, your purpose, you can't just turn it off.
Right.
And you might try to turn a blind eye to it, but life is going to come along and knock you around, whether you believe in God or the universe. That little tug at your elbow is going to become someone slamming you on the ground
Right.
eventually. So you have to follow that purpose. For a long time, I was in those corporate golden handcuffs, and life came along and said, if you won't remove yourself and start doing what you're called to do, the universe is going to take care of it for you. So,
Um,
and that may be a little too hippy dippy for some of your listeners, but I really
yeah.
think there's a lot of truth in that.
But don't
And
worry.
then
Just
the other thing is that,
we're the only listeners, so you're good.
well, well, that's not going to be true for long. You're going to see that like gangbusters for sure. But the other aspect of that is just managing emotional energy, right?
Right.
It's not so much about managing the hours in the day. It's about understanding when your battery is truly empty and you need to recharge, and when you've got a burst of energy, even if it is unfortunately at 2 o'clock in the morning and you can get it
Yeah.
done.
Um, it's funny because you talk about the grind culture, and I think as a tech guy, that's very prominent in the tech world when it comes to, and it's unhealthy. I think a lot of industries are figuring out, like they couldn't figure it out 20 years ago, but some companies are figuring out that it does not make for the most productive use of time when you have people grinding till from midnight to, or from like 5 a.m. to midnight. Um, they call it crunch time in the gaming industry, right? Right before deliverables, since it's unhealthy, but for a while it was a status symbol, oddly enough. Um, but
Yeah, people
you
were
know,
flaunting that.
yeah, yeah, 100%, 100%. This is called the Everybody's Has a podcast. So one thing that I want to do every episode is ask my guest. So Raechel, what is a podcast that you are listening to, or recommend, and why?
Ah, love this question. My favorite podcast right now is Acquired. It is excellent. The podcast started out as covering these, breaking tech acquisitions and tech startups, and they have really expanded their content and started diving into these iconic brands like Microsoft and Visa and Nvidia, but also looking at brands like Starbucks and Costco and companies that we don't traditionally think of as tech, but they have these really interesting business models that we can learn so much from. So they do these incredible deep dives. The Visa one, for example, I think it's like two segments and it ends up being around 4 or 5 hours total. And you learn everything from the history of how Visa got started to their impact in fintech to the social inequities that come from these credit card point systems. And it's incredibly thought provoking and
Mhm.
thoughtful. And I learn something every episode that helps me in my business and in the curious way that I approach life.
Well, you know what you said that I like is that the thing about Starbucks being a tech company. So I've been telling everybody, like, you are in a tech company whether you know it or not, right? Right now in today's society, every company is a tech company. And I think if you the sooner you can embrace that, the sooner you can try to push towards success. So, Raechel, God, thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate it. You're gonna love the tagline, by the way. Um, so my tagline is
Oh,
chat.
no,
My,
what's it gonna be?
so my tagline is chat, listen, laugh. Right. I think that was a nice little way of saying that. So, but I accidentally stumbled upon a goodbye statement when I was interviewing this morning, the very first
Ooh,
one. I said, all right, thank you for joining us on the Everybody Has a Podcast, where we chat, you listen, and hopefully we all have free laughs. So there it is. What do you
I like
think?
it.
Rachel, thank you
I
so
like
much.
it a lot. That's so good.
Right? I'm telling you, man, we're going to blow up. But I appreciate your time. Everyone, thank you so much for listening. If anyone makes this end of the show, we will see you again soon. Rachel, thanks again.
Thank you. My pleasure being here.